As of March 21st, 2025, several men sit on death row, awaiting their execution in April. Among them is Michael Anthony Tanzi, a man whose crimes shook the nation. Executed April 8th, 2025, Florida. Michael Anthony Tanzi was not born a killer. Raised in Florida, his early years were filled with struggle. His mother worked multiple jobs. His father was barely around, and by the age of 14, he had already been arrested for theft. Like many, he became a product of his environment, desperate, angry, and lost. As a teenager, Tanzi spent more time in juvenile detention centers than in school. Drugs, violence, and gang activity became his new reality. But no one could have predicted that his life would spiral into something much darker, something that would lead him straight to death row. It was a warm evening in April when Michael Tanzi made a decision that would change his life forever. A woman, simply going about her day, had the misfortune of crossing his path. What started as a carjacking quickly escalated into something far worse. Tanzi forced his victim into the vehicle, drove to an isolated area, and, in a fit of rage and fear, ended her life in cold blood. The crime was brutal, senseless, and left investigators horrified. But Tanzi didn't stop there. He tried to cover his tracks, burning evidence, disposing of the body, and continuing his routine as if nothing had happened. Michael Anthony Tanzi thought he had gotten away with murder. But what he didn't realize was that every crime leaves behind shadows, traces that even the most careful criminals cannot erase. After the brutal killing of his victim, Tanzi went into hiding. He changed his routine, avoided familiar places, and tried to blend into the crowd. But the police were already closing in. The first breakthrough in the case came from a grainy surveillance camera outside a gas station. The footage showed a car that matched the description of the victim's stolen vehicle. A blurry figure could be seen stepping out of the driver's seat, his posture tense, his movements hurried. That figure was Michael Tanzi. Detectives pieced together the timeline. Witnesses remembered seeing a man near the abandoned crime scene, a place that had once been silent, but now reeked of tragedy. The forensic team found tire tracks, footprints, and a single discarded cigarette butt near the location, one that contained crucial DNA evidence. It was only a matter of time before the name Michael Anthony Tanzi surfaced in police databases. His past record, his history of petty crimes, and his previous arrests for violent behavior all pointed in one direction. The real turning point came when detectives traced his movements to a rundown motel on the outskirts of Miami. It was the kind of place where people checked in but didn't want to be found. Tanzi had been staying there under a fake name, using cash to pay for his room. But one mistake gave him away. A clerk remembered his face from a news report and tipped off the authorities. On the evening of his arrest, a team of officers surrounded the motel, their guns drawn, their voices steady but firm. They pounded on the door of room 207, calling out his name. Silence. Then, a shuffle from inside. The officers waited for resistance, but when the door finally cracked open, they found something unexpected. Michael Tanzi stood there, hands shaking, eyes hollow. There was no dramatic chase, no last-minute escape attempt. He simply raised his hands and whispered, "I know why you're here." The moment he was handcuffed, it was as if the weight of his crime had finally sunk in. No more running, no more hiding. As they led him to the squad car, the flashing red and blue lights painted his face with a strange glow, half in shadow, half illuminated, like a man standing between life and death. At the station, he barely spoke. When detectives placed the evidence before him, the surveillance footage, the DNA match, the eyewitness testimonies, he only nodded, and then after a long silence, he confessed every chilling detail, every regret, every moment he wished he could take back. But in the eyes of the law, regret wasn't enough. The courtroom would soon decide his fate, and death row was waiting. April 8th, 2025. The execution chamber in Florida is prepared. Michael Anthony Tansey is given his last meal, a simple request of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet tea. When asked for his final words, he pauses, then says, "I regret everything. If I could go back, I would. But I know I can't. To my victim's family, I am sorry." At precisely 6 p.m., the lethal injection is administered. In less than 10 minutes, Michael Anthony Tansey is declared dead. The chapter of his life is closed, but the debate rages on. Did justice truly prevail, or was this just another life lost to a broken system? Mekaldeen Mahdi executed April 11th, 2025, South Carolina. Imagine sitting alone in a cold, dimly lit cell, knowing exactly how many days, hours, and minutes remain before you take your last breath. The sound of footsteps in the hallway makes your heart race, because any moment could be the one when they come for you. Some say it's justice. Others say it's just another life lost to a system that never gave second chances. As of March 21st, 2025, Mekaldeen Mahdi is one of the men awaiting execution in the United States. Mekaldeen Mahdi's life did not start with violence. He was once a child with dreams, a boy who wanted to escape the cycle of poverty and hardship that surrounded him. Born and raised in a struggling neighborhood in South Carolina, he was the youngest of 4 siblings. His mother worked tirelessly. His father was absent, and by the time he was 12, Mahdi had already been exposed to the harsh realities of the streets. Music was his escape. He dreamt of becoming a rapper, pouring his pain and frustration into lyrics. But the streets don't let go so easily. Gangs, drugs, and fast money became his new reality. The dream of music faded, replaced by something much darker. The night everything changed was humid and restless. It started as a robbery. Simple, quick, in and out. Mahdi and his accomplices targeted a gas station. The plan was to take the cash and disappear into the night. But something went wrong. One of them was an associate. He must be around 50 years old. He refused to do this, cooperate. Panic set in. There is an argument between Mahdi and him. At one point, Mahdi pulled out the gun he had with him. In a moment of chaos, the trigger was pulled. A single gunshot echoed through the store. The man collapsed. Blood pooled on the tile floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Mahdi stood there, gun in hand, realizing what he had just done. The plan was never to kill anyone, but in that instant, his fate was sealed. Security cameras captured everything. The footage showed his face, his hesitation, his final decision to pull the trigger. Within hours, police identified him. The manhunt began. Mahdi knew he had no way out, but he ran anyway. For days, he moved from one hideout to another. He switched phones, changed cars, even altered his appearance, but the walls were closing in. A close associate, pressured by police, gave away his location. It ended in a cheap motel off the highway, just outside Columbia, South Carolina. Law enforcement surrounded the building. A negotiator tried to talk him out, but Mahdi had already made his decision. He wouldn't go down in a hail of bullets. Instead, after hours of silence, he stepped out, hands raised, surrendering to the fate that awaited him. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. The video, the weapon, the testimony of his accomplices, it all pointed to one outcome. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The sentence, death by lethal injection. In the final moments before his execution, Mekaldeen Mahdi is strapped to the gurney, his wrists secured, his breathing steady but shallow. The execution chamber is silent, except for the faint hum of machinery. A small group watches from behind the glass. Prison officials, reporters, and the family of Samuel Carter, the man he killed that fateful night. As the execution date nears, Mahdi sits in his cell, writing letters, reflecting on a life that could have been different. He has requested his final meal: fried catfish, collard greens, and cornbread. Mikaldeen Mahdi, do you have any last words? I was 19 when I pulled that trigger. I thought I was in control, but the truth is, I was already lost before that night. To the Carter family, I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but if I could trade my life to bring him back, I would. One question still lingers. Was Mikaldeen Mahdi a cold-blooded killer, or just another victim of a life that gave him no other path? And if circumstances had been different, would he have ever pulled that trigger? Moises Sandoval Mendoza, executed April 23rd, 2025, Texas. On March the 18th, 2004, Texas Rochelle O'Neill Tollison, a 20-year-old mother, vanished from her home, leaving behind her 6-month-old daughter, Avery. The following morning, a chilling discovery was made. Rochelle's bedroom was in disarray, furniture overturned, personal items scattered, and baby Avery alone on the bed. The scene painted a grim picture, hinting at a violent struggle that had taken place in the dead of night. As authorities delved deeper, suspicion fell upon Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a 20-year-old acquaintance of Rochelle's. Just days prior, Mendoza had attended a gathering at Rochelle's residence, where he had attempted to engage her in conversation. However, Rochelle had confided to a friend that she wasn't interested in him. Under the weight of mounting evidence, Mendoza was apprehended on March 24th, 2004. During interrogation, he confessed to the heinous crime, revealing that he had strangled Rochelle, sexually assaulted her, and then attempted to conceal his actions by burning her body in a remote creek bed. The brutality of Mendoza's actions sent shockwaves through the community. In 2005, he was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Now, over 2 decades later, Mendoza awaits his execution, scheduled for April 23rd, 2025, in Huntsville, Texas. On the evening of April 23rd, 2025, Moises Sandoval Mendoza lay strapped to the execution gurney inside the Huntsville unit in Texas. The room was silent, the fluorescent lights casting a cold glow over the chamber. Behind the glass, witnesses sat still, their eyes fixed on the man who had once been feared, now powerless in his final moments. The warden stepped forward and asked the question that had been asked to countless men before him. Moises Sandoval Mendoza, do you have any last words? For a moment, Mendoza remained silent, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Then his voice, steady but filled with emotion, broke through the stillness. I spent my whole life running from my past, my mistakes, my choices. But tonight, there's nowhere left to run. And maybe that's the way it was always supposed to be. To the Ramos family, I don't expect you to forgive me. I took someone you loved, and there's no words that can fix that. But I am sorry, more sorry than I've ever been for anything in my life. I can't change what I did, but if I could, I would trade my life for his in a second. He exhaled deeply, then turned his gaze toward the ceiling, as if searching for something beyond the walls of the execution chamber. To those still out there, thinking the streets will save you, they won't. I thought I had power, but I was just a pawn. I see that now. If you're listening, if you still have a chance to change, do it before it's too late. Don't end up here. Don't end up like me. He closed his eyes and let out a final breath. Luis, if you can hear me, I hope you find peace. I hope we both do. With that, the signal was given, and the lethal injection began its course. Mendoza's body went still. His breathing slowed, and within minutes, he was gone. Earlier that evening, he had chosen his final meal: barbecue ribs, cornbread, mac and cheese, and a glass of ice-cold sweet tea. It was a simple request, a last taste of a life he could never get back. As the tray was taken away, Mendoza had stared at the empty plate in silence, knowing that this was the last thing he would ever consume. The question remains, was justice truly served? Or was Mendoza just another lost soul, caught in a system that never gave him a way out?